We'll get started, and we'll hang on. Sorry, I'm just out of diligence. We are going to continue with the recommendations from open open committee meetings. So we've done the environment one, and the second one is now B, which relates to Plan Change 12. Is there any discussion, questions, comments? Staff need to highlight anything? No? Question from Councillor Pascoe.
Yeah, thanks. I do have a question, and it really is just around the feedback that I've had from parts of the community following the previous. I don't know whether we released a comms thing, but the feedback that I'm getting, and it may be misdirected, and I just wonder whether my question might lead to a further comms release. The feedback I'm getting is that this council has just rolled over and accepted the government's NPSUD, and we're just clearly going along. And I know for a fact, having been on the committee, that is not the case. So I wonder whether we shouldn't be telling our community that we have presented in our draft plan some challenges that we think are best, that do challenge NPSUD and some of the government's directives that do challenge that, because we believe that they are better outcomes for the city.
Thank you, Councillor Pascoe, and that's a very good question, and good to receive that feedback. We have a letter, or letters, plural, 50,000 of them going out tomorrow. The covering letter has been reviewed by Councillor O'Leary and Councillor Hamilton, and we make very clear in that covering note the fact that the government is asking us to do one thing, and we are moderating or adjusting that based on some special circumstances that we have here in Hamilton. So that's the main kind of, I guess.
Okay, so you're comfortable that is addressing the issue that I've got, rather than it going out maybe through the Waikato Times and the Herald as a further comms strategy?
Well, I'm fairly confident in terms of the letter and how that has been pitched. Other councillors around the table here have fed into that, and I mean, I'd welcome their comments if they have any in terms of that's strongly worded enough or not.
Okay.
Councillor O'Leary?
Yes. Councillor Rob, share your concerns, which is why we were tasked from the District Plan Committee for the Chair, Ryan, and I to have a glance over those letters, and I did provide some feedback. The pamphlets that go out are excellent, and it is repetitive basically in those that this is being done to us, and we have pushed back as much as possible. And then basically the first sentence, including the heading in the letter, which I gave Mark and the team some feedback to change, is saying that it's very, very clear. Of course, it's still going to get people upset and concerned, but we've done our best to be professional in the letter. We don't necessarily want to throw the government to the wolves on it, but we have been clear that we've pushed. And,
great.
Yeah.
That answers my initial concern.
Yeah.
Are you ready and waiting for the phone calls that you and Ryan will get? Bearing in mind the last time we sent 50,000 letters out to our community, but
my understanding is Councillor Donovan is playing on.
Thanks, Chair. Those are my questions.
Just following up on that question, though, because I think it is a good question. Letters, even a really great letter, it's a lot more impersonal, and we've discovered what happens with Plan Change 9, for example, when people receive letters or and don't have the wraparound additional depth of information and understanding. They're not empowered to know how they don't feel empowered to know how the process will work in terms of them being able to represent their concerns and views. That's really important, because sometimes when those letters arrive, it feels like a fait accompli, like it's something that we're just going to accept as is. And yet there is still process that gives the democratic process and picking up. So I'm wondering, apart from the letters, sorry, because I was getting out of the question then, apologies. Apart from the letters, are there any other media points touched? Are we going to people like the Waikato Business News? Are we working with the Chamber of Commerce? Are we using our social media channels? Are we having a Your Neighbourhood Day where this becomes a focus, for example?
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Again, that's really good, sort of leads into enabling me to answer what we're doing, so thank you. So we've got 4 major community days planned in 4 different parts of the city, where myself and the team and a number of other people from across the organisation will be, I think from 10 till 12 in the morning, and then from roughly 5 till 8 p.m. in the evening. Across 4 days. They are being advertised through our letters and through all our various communication channels. We will also have a webinar, and that's also being advertised to everybody through all these communications. On top of that, we're doing proactive kind of media outreach, and you would have seen a number of stories coming through where we've made ourselves available for media interviews and the like, to try and send the message and to raise that public awareness as much as possible. There's also social media adverts running as well. There's a web page on our website that's going live shortly as well, in terms of FAQs and things like that. So,
if I might just, through the chair, add to Mark's comments. You may not have had a chance to get to your email, but the executive update on Tuesday included a full copy of the letter and information pack. It also provided the details that Mark has just provided in terms of those 4 public meetings and the times of those, locations, times. It's an executive update. It also outlines a friend of the submitter service that's also available to anyone who is seeking some assistance on how to prepare a submission. So that's an executive update from Tuesday in your emails.
I wouldn't mind a bit of clarity too. So just asking Lance, I know we're not to comment, all of us running for re-election or whatever, are not to comment on council resources on Facebook page or anything like that. We do sometimes get tagged into that discussion, incidentally, by the way, but we are, I presume, I just need a clarity, we are able to share a social media ad that has been generated by the council to inform our public, or is that a bridge too far also?
That you are able to share.
We're able to share, but not to comment on within.
If it's normal business, yes, which is, this is normal business, is talking about a plan change. So. Yeah.
No. So during the election, we need to be clear about that so nobody accidentally finds themselves in a situation. I think it's a bit silly because I do believe it is business as usual and we should be communicating with our public. However, moving on, Councillor Thompson.
Thanks. Mark, I just had a question around what Auckland has proposed. We just only have seen like a very brief article where they're saying that they're saying no sausage flats, at least in certain areas. But are they doing that through, again, qualifying matters? Or I'm just interested in how they're kind of pushing that design element with their plan change.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. In part using another sort of avenue that's been made available through the legislation, which is effectively called other matters. Mm-hmm. The approach Hamilton City's taken is through Te Tiriti Whaimana, which is actually highlighted there in black and white in the legislation itself as a qualifying matter to be considered. We feel that to be a far stronger platform to be moving forward on than this other matters pathway in the legislation. In terms of the sausage block reference, I think that's in terms of their approach to heritage. Again, we've taken a much stronger approach to heritage. In my view, we have assessed the heritage based on its relevance to national significance, and that carries a lot higher statutory weighting in the RMA than character. So there's a very important distinction there which we have made, which affords heritage a higher level of weighting or protection.
Okay. And I mean, just thinking, taking on Councillor Martin's comments previously around, our advocacy for having some more tools to push for better urban design outcomes. Would it be worth, I understand workload's massive at the moment, but when there is some breathing space, would it be worth working the likes of Auckland and other metros to put together what could be a change to legislation that would enable that? So whether it's prescriptive or a more flexible tool, but something that we can then say, okay, this is the change in black and white that we're looking for, and we can take that to ministers and say, hey, look, we've done an assessment, it wouldn't impact on housing capacity or the delivery of housing, but it would deliver better outcomes for our communities. Is that something that we would be worth?
It's a really good suggestion. Yes, we can consider that. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, certainly. I mean, I think we've made it very clear in terms of our views as to some of the deficiencies in terms of legislation already to date. We've also communicated that to some of our local MPs and the like as well, as part of a wider kind of comms strategy to bring everybody up to speed with what Hamilton is doing. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So if we can give them a solution on a silver platter and say we all agree on this and this is a practical way forward, then maybe we've got a better chance of.
It would ultimately require, as you point out, an amendment to the legislation itself. And we have limited ability with the legislation that's in front of us to make any real significant changes in that space.
Yeah. Is that maybe something we could pick up as a staff action with the current chair of District Plan Committee? I was saying something extremely profound. Just basically looking at recommendations for changes to legislation to enable us to drive better urban design outcomes, so we can advocate for those.
I'd probably redirect to Mark and Blair and saying this committee is going to be carrying on the next term potentially. Is that something we'd pick up and sort of beyond the scope of today's approval? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I'm happy for it just to be noted.
Councillor Seroff noted it, so
okay.
Mark and I will just pick it up in the work program and we'll discuss that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Apologies.
Caught up.
Councillor McPherson.
Rob's question and looking at the letter that's been sent to us to look at, I'm a little concerned at the terminology saying the government's done this and the government's done that. In this case, it was actually a vote in Parliament and the two major parties supported it. And when looking at the letter, it doesn't make that clear. And Rob's question sort of highlighted that for me. Including actually Angela's answer, all about the government did this, and I think that would actually it's a different nuance than I would like to see something that said Parliament has decided this or which parties in Parliament supported it.
Okay, let's not get into the facts, but I think the intent is clear, and it was about a bipartisan. The right word?
Well, it wasn't totally because from memory, ACT opposed it.
But there were two major parties.
But that's not. Yeah,
that's not
it's not exactly bipartisan, but I just think it's not quite neutral, the letter, and not deliberately.
Okay, point taken. Staff, do you feel that a small amendment can be made to the letter that
I think the member's point is a very good one. But I would say
mine's even better.
Sorry, councillor, your point is very good.
Thank you.
Strokes. But at the end of the day, it is still government who has passed the legislation.
Well, then I disagree with this letter. And I'd like a discussion about
So,
it because this is not putting an accurate picture.
I think it could be easily amended, could it not, Lance, with government with support of the National Party? Or no, it can't be.
I think if it said
Parliament?
Parliament,
with support of
They're printed.
the major parties.
They've all been printed.
Mayor, yeah, with respect to you, Paula, so the letters have been printed because we need to make the notification date of 20th of August, which is Saturday.
well, with respect, you've actually bought what you've done inadvertently. I'm not saying it's deliberate. You've bought into a massive political argument that's going on at the moment about, and yet it's not the full picture that's been put out there. And
Can I offer a suggestion, councillors? I think there is opportunity for us to add this message to our media information releases. So, notwithstanding that the letter, I think, is ready to be circulated tomorrow, we can certainly ensure that all our media comms and Facebook and social media picks up on that subtle but important message. So, if members are happy with that, I think that preserves the letters which are literally about to be mailed, but we can certainly pick up that point.
see, I think that may be a part of the solution. In this case, there was a clear intention by both National and Labor to make it future-proof, if you like, their NPSUD proposals, so that as party governments changed, they didn't sort of cut the rug out from each other's feet, and they wouldn't have even gone up had they not both supported it.
Well, we have to find a solution through this. I understand how strongly you feel, and I do think there could have been a refinement to that was, but we're in this situation now. Are there any other ways we can strengthen that message? Because clearly you're not going to recall however many thousand letters.
Well, I think Blair's suggestion is a good one, is that Dan and the team can actually change all the communications outside of the letter so that they're really consistent with what Councillor Dave's saying.
Failing that.
And with Martin's wording too.
Look, I'm not trying to get them to recall 50,000 letters. I do think it speaks a little bit to political naivety in the organisation, unfortunately, and it wasn't intentional, so I'm not trying to say that.
Yeah.
In fact, the intent was probably to do the opposite, but I just think I'm thinking of the flow over from the Three Waters debate. Becomes an anti-government thing, which would be, in this case, is not fair.
Yeah, okay, look, I get that. So we've got a solution going forward. And just in that, I think we learn from this just to make sure that we always accurately reflect the thinking that sits behind it. I understand the intent was just to let people know that it was something something that council had imposed upon it that we had a reaction to, and the who wasn't quite clear. So I support your point, Dave, and I'm not sure we can take it much further. You want to make any other changes?
Well, I think, I don't know whether we put something in the motion along the lines of what Blair's saying, just to say that in future communications regarding this, our points will canvass the bipartisan nature, the parliamentary vote
to include
nature
that.
of the support.
I think it's not a material change. I think we can incorporate that, and I think in the minute notes it should be reflected that it was noted as a concern, because I think it's legitimate, and therefore it's it's there for people to see. But if you can amend the other communication points, and in our conversations with the media and anything we speak to the public about as they start to interact with this topic, makes the point that how this decision was made outside of council. The other key point for me is how we actually sought to influence that decision in different ways, but didn't actually necessarily get what.
I think the other point, just looking forward a few months, we wouldn't want to give succour to people that think, we just have to change the government and we'll get rid of the NPSUD, because in this case, that's probably not what would happen.
Right, excellent. Any further questions? Deputy Mayor Taylor.
It may depend on who our Hamilton East MP is.
Thank you. Just a question following on from Rob's question about perceptions that we perhaps could have pushed back harder.
The medium density in our sub-regional centres, such as your Chartwells, et cetera, et cetera. What room to move could we have had on that? Did we have to go right to that extent without including all these sub-regional centres and making them more medium density?
Yeah, Deputy Mayor, that's a very good question. So the MPSUD had a policy 3D, which required us to look at all those centres and required us to intensify around those centres commensurate with the scale and size of those centres. So we did a very robust analysis to look at the variety of services available at those centres, the community facilities available at those centres, the actual geographic size of them, which is where we landed with the proposed zoning. So what you'll note is that those centres we've identified, most of them we've suggested a 400 metre walkable catchment, and within that walkable catchment we look to zone, and we're proposing medium density, and that medium density zone is partway between what the new general residential density is, but not as great as what we are talking about in and around the central city.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a halfway house in effect. And what we're proposing is sort of 3 to 5 story typology. So I
know what we're proposing. Yep. What discretion did we have on that?
We were directed to upzone commensurate with the size and scale of those centres. So we have considered the extent to which you upzone from them in terms of that walkable catchment, and we've considered the type and scale of development that would be reasonable for those.
So we did have discretion.
We had discretion as to how much we upzoned, but there was a very clear directive that we are to upzone around certain centres commensurate with their scale and size.
Thank you. So we could actually have in this plan change slightly. We could have had lesser areas. We didn't have to go to this extent with the medium density.
It must be supported by evidence. So I don't think any of my team would be able to sit there and say that I can support Chartwell not having something greater than general residential density surrounding it because of the scale of that centre. But bearing in mind the team will then be sitting in front of a panel of commissioners next year justifying their position. There will be, and we've already had feedback from the likes of Kaingaora, who want us to be going further in terms of greater intensification around those centres.
No, thank you. Look, the reason I'm pursuing this is because I think this is going to be a real sticking point for the public. And my question to you really is, if we're pushing back, because we are pushing back on lots of this, we're saying we want to just do this in directed areas and all that sort of stuff. If we're pushing back anyway, why not push back on that as well?
I think it's all about scale and degree and a sense of reasonableness. Like, can we reasonably justify the position we've gone out with? And our unequivocal answer to that is yes, we can. If we're then suggesting what you are, and that possibly we don't intensify around any of those centres at all, we don't think that's a justifiable position. We don't think that's a winnable position in terms of convincing the commissioners that is a reasonable and justified response to this policy 3D, which is directing us to intensify around this.
Right. Just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting we don't do any of them.
Yeah.
I was just questioning the extent to which we're doing it.
Wasn't. Yeah.
And just about finished, Mayor Paul. So in terms of the time frame, this is quite a lengthy process. You're saying it'll go to a commissioner's hearing next year?
Yep. So
roughly when next year do you think?
We're scheduled to commence hearings 14th of February, 2023.
Okay.
We're going to have a roughly sit down for 4 days of hearings. They'll be combined hearings with Waikato and Waipa. We've done that because we had a joint submission on the bill in the first place. We have some strategic matters in common, such as Te Ture Whaimana,
Yep.
which will be advantageous for us to be getting a clear direction from the panel and talking to them about. We then will move into what we're calling substantive hearings in the May-June window. So we've set down for roughly the 22nd of May through the 6th of June to have what we're calling substantive hearings. Those hearings will start to unpack what we're doing around centres. They'll start to unpack the extent of the CBD walkable catchment. And again, for example, we've already had feedback that our 800 metre walkable catchment from the city centre isn't going far enough. Some people would like us to be going to 1,200 metres from there. So
Okay.
those are the things which will be debated through that.
No, thank you for that, Mark. So very last one, Chris Luxon has suggested that National may rethink their position on this. By the time this actually gets to its culmination, it's pretty much next year's election anyway, September, October.
Mm.
I question why we're playing the game to this extent, because it's a stupid law, and I still think we're playing the game more than we have to, personally, because I think it could be off the table in a year's time anyway.
So yeah, what I would say to that is that the legislation is very clear. We must notify by the 20th of August this year to be legally compliant to bring about these changes as directed. So we are doing that, and we are putting forward a proposition which we believe is a defendable one. We believe it's a good solution for the city, and we are balancing some of those key priorities in terms of the health and wellbeing of the river.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question from that, if I may. We've been workshopping this up through the District Plan Review Committee and other workshops for quite some time and also that, I mean, that's correct, isn't it? All councillors have had their hand over this, and we pushed as hard as we could against the bigger aspirations of this bill, using what tools we felt were legitimate. Isn't that right? But you suggested to us how we could get a better outcome for the city than the broad approach that government, Parliament laid upon us.
Yes, Mayor Paul, it's a very good point. So, I mean, yep, let's just cast our minds back. The bill was introduced in roughly October last year without any pre-consultation. Nobody knew it was landing. It went through an expedited select committee process and was gazetted into law on, I think, roughly the 18th of December, just before Christmas. So we had to turn around very, very quickly in those last couple of weeks before Christmas and early in January to come up with a solution, to come up with a pathway forward and to execute that in a very, very short space of time. So yes, as you say, Mayor Paula, we've worked closely with the District Plan Committee over that period of time. We've evolved a solution which we think is a good one in the face of legislation, which I know we all have different views on, and here we are today. Yeah,
but yeah, so that's fine. But thankfully, there is a process in which the public can now have their say, and that will be quite big, I would imagine. And so through that process, we'll be able to hear other rationales from both the wider community and the development community and any other parties to development. That will come through the hearings process.
Absolutely, Mayor Paula, and just make the comment that we're continuing that engagement through the submission period, and that's not always the done thing. But we're doing that so that we give the public the best opportunity to be made aware of what's happening and to be able to submit on the plan change. We've extended the submission period beyond the statutory minimum of 20 working days. We've extended that to 30 working days, which takes us out to the end of September, I think, from memory. And I guess what I would say, though, is the legislation, because of its prescriptive nature, gives little room for change. So I think we just need to be very mindful of that when we are
So
engaging with.
that's,
with
I guess
the
that's my
public.
point.
Yeah.
We had little room to engage, apart from kick the process off, apart from giving a symbolic send away of the government. We are legally constrained to what we can play, the space we can play in at the moment.
Oh, massively. Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very prescriptive piece of legislation that has directed us to implement certain standards and where they should be implemented. So the submission process will be quite different to your typical Schedule 1 RMA process because of the nature of the legislation we're dealing with.
Yeah, so we were between a rock and a hard place. But anyway, carry on. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Just one last question was around there's area plans in here and they look great, but obviously we need to make them happen. And so I'm just wondering, particularly in terms of the Central City North area plan, what will the process look like around discussing and prioritising infrastructure? And I note, for example, we've got work underway with the PT element, but the priority list for the biking and micromobility program doesn't actually prioritise this area.
Yep. So again, Councillor, it's a really good question. Thank you. So there is infrastructure master planning work underway for Three Waters, which is needing to happen at pace to inform investment schedules and the like. We do need to come together internally to I guess come to grips with what that stage 1 area means from a holistic joined up investment point of view. The area plans, as you refer, are a really good starting point for that discussion, but there's more work to be done. And I would also add there's work to be done in terms of looking at how we deploy financial contributions, which we're introducing through this plan change, into these areas so that we can deliver some better urban design, urban form outcomes, so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past in terms of some of our intensification that's occurred previously.
That kind of work will be ready for the next long-term plan, I assume?
That work will be kicking off in the next few weeks because we need to understand that if these policies are successful and they roughly come out as we have proposed, we need a plan in place as to what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor O'Leary.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Just following on from the Deputy Mayor's questions, would a bigger risk, I mean, I'd love to have not had any of the, our feelings on this. It's just horrible. As Councillor Gallagher said the other day, it could be a dump, but wouldn't a bigger risk be, legislation is law, and like Lachlan said, if we don't follow the law, we could find ourselves being run by commissioners. But that aside, a bigger risk would be if we went too light in terms of where the Deputy Mayor was talking about the suburban centres, and you don't feel it's defendable, because we have to defend our position, right, in this next process, and we're likely going to see investors and developers coming in saying we've gone too light. So if we'd gone lighter or softer or whatever term you want to call it, then is the process that the other submitters make a stronger case, and then the commissioners would then decide for us?
Yes, Councillor, you've summed it up exceedingly well. So effectively, we need to put forward our strongest possible case. If we come in with a weak position or a weak evidential basis to support the plan, we will be scrutinised for that. The commissioners also will scrutinise us, as will submitters, and will likely swing in a direction that we might not want to find ourselves in terms of if we came in at one end of the spectrum to say, I don't know, hypothetically, we're not upzoning around any of those centres, we could very well find ourselves at the other end of the spectrum with a plan with recommendations from a commissioner panel to say something quite different.
Yeah.
To that. So,
And then so is the process once they go through the hearings and then they draft up their decision, do they just present that to us, or do we have an opportunity to reflect on their decision and have a process back?
it's relatively binary. So,
Okay.
so this council will receive recommendations from the independent hearing panel following the close of hearings. So expect that to be in the back half of next year.
Yeah.
You will have the choice to either accept or reject those recommendations. In the event you accept, they become operative and come into effect. In the event you reject them, the minister is involved in the process at that stage and makes a final determination. So effectively from here, we go through the submission phase, and the panel creates the recommendations, and then this council receives those recommendations back.
And so it'll be the new council that will decide on the recommendations. Yeah.
Yes, but I just want to be really clear. It's binary.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
either accept or
understand.
reject.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, you don't have the ability to start changing the recommendations.
And is it is it the minute we reject one thing, that rejection goes to the minister for decision?
Correct.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Hamilton?
Thanks, Mark. Just one question for clarity in terms of going forward for us as councillors. If there are some queries that start to come in, the best conduit, is it still plan change at hcc.govt.nz?
Yes. Yes. But I mean, we would really like public to be attending those open days. The purpose of those open days is to channel as many people as possible into those settings, into those events, for them to then engage with staff.
But if we get, multiple emails, we'll just conduit to that, and then the response team will be ready to offer those dates.
We'll be triaging those and responding to them. Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. And well, certainly for myself, I always like to be sort of copied back in, so I know that that loop's been closed with that resident or whatever.
Yep. Noted. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Madam Chair, can I ask procedural questions and guidance? I haven't asked a question, and neither has Councillor Donovan, and I just want clarification because we're discussing item 12, and part of item 12 is some minutes, and I refer particularly to page 112, where in our role as commissioners, we've been appointed to a couple of hearing panels that are not subject to Plan Change 12. And I guess I'm just trying to get clarification whether or not Councillor Donovan and I should be participating at all in any of the discussion in regards to Plan Change 12.
But
does that make sense? Because
I get you, but you're not being assigned to Plan 12.
No,
so I think
it's the one that I'm not. No. But I just the way that we're going to have to accept the minutes, and in the minutes is an appointment of Donovan and Wilson onto some other hearings.
I get you.
And I'm just wanting to be very cautious.
So the minutes are not actually being accepted at this meeting, so you're quite comfortable. Separate, the minutes will be taken to council on the 14th. They're just for your information. We included the minutes so that you have the context of what was discussed.
Yeah, so the minutes get approved later, but this is the recommendations that we're talking about.
I think it's the recommendations at the top of page 112. That's the point. It's the general manager recommendations, I think.
Oh, the second one.
Yeah.
We're only looking at the first one at this point.
No, well, it's got general manager report.
Yes, plan changes, but there's two parts.
Two parts.
Yeah. So we're only on the first part, not the second part.
No, but through the chair, I think what Councillor Wilson's wanting to clearly outline is what is at the top of general manager report, that we are in the process of appointing two of our colleagues in this case to a hearings process. And obviously what Councillor Wilson is correctly asking guidance is he still able to participate in terms of the first recommendation, Plan 12? So I guess a yes or no.
And or could we just move them as two separate motions?
They are two separate
but
motions.
you
That's
just want
why, yes,
clarification.
you can participate in this one.
We're just
Next one,
doing
I'd
B.
suggest moving to-
Thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to make sure that we
That
were
makes
being.
sense. Thank you for raising it. It's good to raise those issues. Okay, so do we have a mover?
Yeah, I'd like to move.
With your indulgence, can I ask another question?
Just one?
Okay, I'll make it just one then. Thank you.
Last time you went on for a whole long period.
He's allowed to. He's
Just a
retiring.
question that's come out of the discussion. I just wonder, have we been in contact with Waipa and Waikato, who also have to notify and are probably going through exactly the same angst that we are with their less than 50,000 letters? And just to see, because there will be residents on both sides, on all sides of the border, so to speak, who will get a chance to test how good each of us are in communication.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Pascoe. So yes, the communication engagement with Waikato and Waipa has been pretty extensive, and hence why we have worked together to appoint a joint panel, and hence why we're going to have a joint hearing to begin with them starting 14th of February. My understanding is both Waipa and Waikato are looking at sort of mass comms, if I can call it that, similar to ourselves. It's a legislative requirement in terms of sending out the letters, unless there's other means such as newsletters that are already going to all ratepayers in the district or city. So yes, they're having to undertake similar exercises.
So they're all ready to go now for the 20th deadline?
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor
Yeah, that's my
Hamilton,
understanding. Yeah.
question? Sorry, question.
When you're ready.
Have you got another question, Rob? It's done.
Well, you said one question.
I kind of did. Is it
cut me off on the second
is it
one.
absolutely pivotal to you making a decision, or?
Oh, yes, it is, I think, yeah. Of course I'll say yes.
Well, make it brief.
Yes.
Make it super brief.
No, I've already asked my second question.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Hamilton is moving. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Thompson. Okay, we'll go into debate. You're the mover.
Thanks. Look, you're right, really, to say we're between a rock and a hard place with this policy. It is bipartisan, but it's a bit like a Las Vegas wedding where I think someone's woken up in the morning and gone, damn. But nonetheless, it's the reality that we're dealt with. And I think we've actually done really well to get a really balanced response. This council's has been unapologetic about revitalising the CBD, and we've been able to turn this plan change and guide it towards the CBD in that northern corridor, which I think will give us some really good outcomes for density, for revitalisation, and underlying that, give us half a chance of actually funding the infrastructure that's needed to support this density. Throughout the process, we've also done a detailed infrastructure analysis of our traffic light assessment of our infrastructure, and it shows that we're effectively orange lighting all over the city. So for us to have a chance of providing commensurate infrastructure, we need to at least try and ring fence that or provide a coherent and commensurate response. The other thing which is really interesting, sorry, I'll just wait for you guys. This morning we talked about the Environment Committee and climate change, and I had a good talk with one of the ladies that probably thought I was a bit of a denier at the start, but when she was respectful of my position, and when I said, oh, by the way, look at what we're doing with our district plan with financial contributions, this bipartisan bill said 0 permeability. We've put a bottom line at 30% permeability. We're asking for 2 trees to be planted on a site, and with the financial contributions, it's going to raise up to $50 million towards gully restoration in the next 10 years. So this is a meaningful change, and it's on the back of a district plan. So that's pretty exciting. And then from a developer point of view, you say, oh, you're adding more additional costs. No, because those costs are largely cost neutral because of the improved consenting pathways. This isn't actually additional cost to the developer. So I think we've found a really sweet spot there. What is the risk if we don't approve this today? It may not be perfect to everyone. The risk is if we do not approve the motions as we've had before, Minister Parker can come in and provide the purest 3x3 with no mitigation all over our city. That is the risk before you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, maybe Councillor Wilson? No?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. I haven't been involved in the district plan committee, but I've watched with admiration as the committee has worked its way through what is a significant change in direction. And I have to say how impressed I've been with the capacity of our staff and the intellectual muscle they have brought to this complex issue. And I am reminded it is a bipartisan piece of legislation. This isn't just the current government, it is National and Labor saying, this is what we want you to do. I have marvelled at how our staff have been able to utilise what tools are available, particularly the qualifying matters, to chisel out a meaningful attempt at mitigating some of what I believe could be a really dangerous strategy that could lead to modern day slums and just frankly crap property development. And I think staff should be congratulated. And I also have to say that Councillor Ryan has done an incredible job of understanding and being able to lead. So I'm very thankful for the work that is done. The reality is I can understand why the community will be a little concerned, because I'm terrified at the thought that a 600 square metre or an 800 square metre section can suddenly have 3 dwellings up to 3 floors. A lot of people will be waking up being concerned about that. But the responsibility has to be laid at the bipartisan legislation that led to it. And Hamilton City Council has done and continues to try to do its very best within a very restrictive parameter to come up with innovative ways of mitigating this legislation. And so I think this council has been blessed by having the staff we have and the leadership in Ryan to enable the process that we've got. So I think I've articulated that. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson.
Firstly, I want to start by saying that I don't share some of the views around this table. I strongly believe that density can be done well, and that when it's done well, it has huge benefits for a city. So our job should not be to stop more housing or necessarily to, for example, to stop more housing around our suburban centres, but to push for the ability to have better urban design outcomes. We can be proactive, and that's why I asked just before about actually coming up with solutions that have the support from other councils as well, that we can hand to the government and say, hey, look, this doesn't impact on our ability to supply houses, but it would mean better neighbourhoods and better outcomes for our community. So I would love to push that work forward early next term. Our suburban centres are places where we want to have more density. Keeping the character of areas should not be a barrier to affordable, decent, warm, dry housing. We want neighbourhoods that we can be proud of, but that doesn't mean stopping change. If you look down some of these streets, actually there are lots of really old, shoddy-looking houses that are probably drafty and cold, and they need replacing. And when they're replaced, they'll have houses with much better standards put in their place. So I absolutely want to see those houses be well designed. We don't want poor outcomes for our neighbourhoods. And that is a real weakness with the legislation that's come through and something that we should fight against. But I don't believe we should be fighting against having quality density around our centres. It's one of the best things that we could actually do for climate change is have people live near amenities and work and employment and near convenient low carbon transport options, not living on the edge of the city where they're almost certainly going to be dependent on a private car. And I would also note that poor design and poor materials are not unique to infill. Look at some of the greenfield development going on, and you can see cladding that's going to look really bad in only a matter of years. In fact, it already does. You can see urban design outcomes that are actually quite poor. So this is something that we can do for the whole of our city, not just for infill. In terms of pushing for better urban design. I think the staff have done an excellent job with this. As Councillor Ryan said, there are some really big wins in here, pushing for trees to be a part of developments, for permeability, for better water efficiency, for financial contributions to support keeping our river clean and restoring our gullies, and also contributions for improving the streetscapes in our neighbourhoods. So I do want to push back against a lot of negativity, because there's some great stuff in here too, and our staff have done an excellent job with what they've been handed. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor, Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Southgate. Look, I've always found this plan change difficult, and elected members might remember 3 years ago when this council was first formed and we had a session on what was important to us. I raised uncontrolled subdivision as something really important to me. This problem is not something I've just latched on to. I believe what I'm saying. On the one hand, we have to be fighting off the government's foolish 3 stories everywhere plan. And Plan Change 12, by and large, is doing that in a way which makes sense. I think parts of it are great, and I've conveyed that to Ryan. Focusing, high density in particular areas, that's completely logical, and obviously great to have got ourselves in a position that we can now use not denigrating the health of the river as a defence against the government's insane plans. What I've always struggled with, and I still do, is what we're giving away as we fight this plan. Staff are recommending something here to us. Yep, based on their expert advice, they're recommending it to us. But as our job as elected members is to decide for ourselves. I absolutely understand the argument that we're bound by this foolish legislation, that there seems to be no choice for us. But you know what? Stupid legislation, if it's that wrong, doesn't always last, and this won't. And in response to Councillor Ryan, I don't think Mr Parker will be a minister after October. And if Luxon wants to get National to get elected, I think he will revisit this, and he'll promise to, and National could well get in. And in the meantime, we don't have to get on our knees and accept it. After the Three Waters fiasco, between a rock and a hard place just doesn't wash for me anymore. From the start, I've been saying, let's not offer up things we don't want to do in order to present this case. By the time we have to present this case, there'll be a new government anyway, quite possibly. Let's not sacrifice things we don't have to. So when the consultation happens on Plan Change 12, I think we are going to get plenty of feedback, as we should, particularly on the medium density and residential centres. If you're expecting to be thanked for opening up parts of Chartwell, Thomas Road shops, Hamilton East, etc., to medium density with 3 stories without a resource consent and up to 5 stories, you'll be disappointed. So let's not become conceited and about our wonderful defence. And remember and forget that there's a real world out there still. There's a real city with real people when you knock on the door who are gutted by what's happening in their neighbourhood. And I think this is coming to focus for me partly with our, with our Hamilton urban growth strategy, where we kind of proudly trumpeted heading up to a 70% of our new housing coming from infill. I think we're dreaming if we think Hamiltonians want that.
Wrap up, please, shortly.
Yeah, so look, I'm honestly grappling with this, and just not happy. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Yep, thanks very much. Just a few comments on what Jeff said. Firstly, it's acknowledged that he has taken a similar position all the way through the council. So certainly wouldn't accuse him of jumping around onto new issues or anything like that. He has been consistent there. But I would say to him that I agree we should be fighting off National and Labor's plan. It's not the current government's plan. It was the two major parties' plan, as I mentioned earlier. And he discussed who might be here in a year's time. I'd suggest to him that the person in National who's currently the leader may not be there necessarily in 12 months either, given the state of yesterday's leadership poll and his the way he's dropping in that. So don't count on anything in politics. Let's do what we think's right is the message that I get out of this. And Jeff, I would say that we were pushing for better quality intensification in the city. Actually, not just this council, but last council as well. We were starting in that direction. I believe we probably would have come up with something like Plan Change 12 ourselves, even if the National and Labor parties had said nothing in Parliament, because we knew what we had before, what we currently have is delivering in many cases poor outcomes. And you and I and all sorts of councillors have faced complaints about what's happening under the current plan. We know it's not working very well, and at least under Plan Change 12, it's defining areas where you should have intensification and where you shouldn't. And I think that's important. The other thing about the 70%, a large proportion of that infill is going to come in the CBD, where I think you actually support greater intensification there. So it's not a sort of a blanket way of looking at this. There are some good outcomes that you can get from intensification, providing it's the right sort. So I want to echo comments of Ewan and others, thanking the councillors involved, the staff involved, Ryan for keeping on top of it and keeping that link between staff and the elected wing going, which I think is very important. And to say that we should, I'm a bit like Sarah, I support the move in this direction. I don't think it's a bad thing. I'll be interested to see the sensible feedback as opposed to just anti-everything feedback that we get during the submission process, because I think that will tell us where we should tweak and change things to improve it. But I think we are heading in the right direction with this.
Thank you. Oh yeah, no, you're next now then, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Bunting.
All right. Listen, I'm hearing a lot about a rock and a hard place, rock and a hard place, rock and a hard place, and it seems to be a theme of this term. But you do actually have a choice when you are between a rock and a hard place, and one of those choices is not to stay between the rock and the hard place. To me, one of the choices I'll be making today will reflect one of those choices we have, and that is, do we pass this unanimously? I'm reading the room. This will go through. But I will not be accepting that it's going through unanimously for two reasons. First of all, I do want to pay tribute to the work that's been done. I agree there's some massive wins. I love the trees in the yards, love the way it's been tackled, I love the way the intelligent and respectful way it's been brought through, and I've enjoyed the leadership of it. And I like the intellectual grunt that's been talked about as well. I agree with all that. There are two reasons you'd vote against something. One, you don't agree with the direction it takes, and two, that it doesn't go far enough. And it's for that second reason that I will be quite simply voting against it. To take a unanimous position on this could well be misconstrued, and we have been burned by that before. I agree with, and when I first stood for council 6 years ago, one of my biggest platforms was build up in the central city rather than up in the suburbs. Now, I am not going to spend my penultimate council meeting going against one of my very first principles, I'm sorry. So for that reason, I will be voting against it. I'm supportive of going up in the central city. I think we could do with much more intensification, and call it a simplistic view if you like. But I'm going to be consistent with that view that I've held all that time. I would invite people who say it's not such a bad thing to go down Rutherford Street at 3 p.m. 3 p.m. in the afternoon on any given weekday. When you look at the intensification down there next to Hukanui School, it's tragic. It's awful. And it's not just it's not an aesthetic thing. It's putting people in danger because our infrastructure simply isn't there. It simply isn't there. And we cannot keep up with the speed of developers. It's proven. There were some bad examples There's been some bad examples of design, and I think Sarah had a lovely phrase. It was sausage flats. I was going to call them sausage factories, but sausage flats. And we know the ones you're talking about. We're talking about down Thames Street. We're talking about Claudelands. And I remember when I first arrived here in 1992, and I went around this town on my bike, and I thought, what a beautiful city. And I came through Claudelands. It was lovely. I thought, who the heck put those there? And they were those sausage flats down Thames Street and Union Street and the likes. And it was a blight. Another blight was when we built houses so close to the road down Fifth Avenue. Now we can't get a wide enough road to put cycleways down there on one of our main arterial routes because it was from poor planning. This, to my mind, would be an equal-sized tragedy. So I don't want this to be unanimous. It will go through, but I would like to be on record as saying I support high-rises in the central city, but I am not for high-rises in Chartwell, and I'm not for high-rises in Claudelands. It's as simple as that for me, but I appreciate the work that's done.
Thank you. Councillor O'Leary.
I'm not for high rises in any of those places either. I'm not for a suburban house in a residential quiet street to have three-storied dwellings on each side. No one's for that. But the government or however we're going to express that is the lawmaker, and this is legislation. And I'm sorry, but I'm finding it quite frustrating because it's pretty easy to vote against something when you know that the majority of the members around the table will pass it because we have to respect our fiduciary duty. We have to abide by the law. And we're going to pass this not because we like it, but because we're doing our fiduciary duty. Because if we didn't, then we're saying to the citizens of our city, we don't care. Whatever, we'll just leave it up to the commissioners. We'll put our city at a much greater risk by having the decision taken out of our hands. It'll be much worse than a dump. So sometimes you have to sit around this table in this chamber and make the tough decisions and make the difficult decisions because it is our fiduciary duty, because this is legislation. We don't get to pick and choose. It's against the law to do 100 kilometres in a 50-kilometre street. You can still do it if you like, but it's against the law. This is legislation. By its very definition, it's law setting. Our staff have done an exceptional job, and they are the experts. I'm not an expert here. Councillor Ryan's done an exceptional job at chairing this, and he was brave enough to put his hand up and say, I will chair this. Because talk about a political, or maybe he didn't have a choice. I can't remember.
No, he accepted the challenge.
But he did accept the challenge, and he was the right person to do that, because none of us if we could intensify in places where we only wanted to intensify and do it really well with how we could afford the infrastructure, I know that we would all be doing it, but we can't because the law says we can't. So I'm struggling with those comments in the chamber today, and I think it's unfair on colleagues that will vote whether we like this or not, because I'm not going to be going out there campaigning and saying this is fabulous, but have we done a good enough job without leaving it in the hands of someone else? We've done the best that we can, and I congratulate and thank staff for the tremendous work you have done with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pascoe.
Yeah, look, I'm passing on that same message of Councillor O'Leary in one particular area, and that's to thank our staff and to thank the committee, of which I've been a member, for the work in what has been a very, very technical journey to where we've got today. But I think where I disagree with Councillor O'Leary is that opposing this helps send a message to government. The fact that it's legislation doesn't belie the fact that it could be good legislation or bad legislation. And irrespective of whether it's a bipartisan decision on behalf of two political parties, doesn't necessarily mean either that it's good legislation. I'm reflecting here, and I know I talked with one of my elected members during the tea break about the triple CFA, which was some legislation that government passed last year and finally put it into action in December. And it's around financing and granting loans to people and all the rigmarole lenders now have to go through before they can lend money to anybody. And it's turned out to be an absolute nightmare. No one's getting any loans, or hardly anyone is getting any loans now, because the banks can't tick all the boxes to approve me as a good credit risk, because they think I might lose my job or whatever. So now the government is having to go back and tweak that legislation to make it work. And I think that there's some similarities in the triple CFA legislation as there is now in this, that the government have, that the elected parties in government have decided this is what's needed in New Zealand to solve the housing crisis. They haven't really done their homework because they haven't come here to find out what the needs of our city particularly is, unique in some areas from Auckland and Wellington. And so therefore, one broad brush approach means that we have to look like Auckland and Wellington in terms of intensification. So I think that there's a good message here today in opposing it, but I agree with Councillor Bunting. It's likely to go through, but perhaps the message is that might go through without unanimous support. Thank you.
Thank you. I might I've been scribbling notes all over the shop. I might take a turn in debate. I just have to say I'm going to reluctantly, and that's the word, reluctantly support this motion. I've made it blatantly clear in all my conversations, all my contributions to the discussions we've had over the last period of time on this and prior, that this is not the right fit for Hamilton. I have gone to Wellington and I have made it clear to multiple cabinet ministers that this is not the right fit for Hamilton. We already knew that there were issues with the quality of infill. That came up last term. And looking around the room, I can see a number of councillors who have time and time again said we've got to build the right city, not just squeeze things in an ad hoc fashion. So this was a bolt out of the blue and not at all good news. I'm concerned that the approach the government's taken here is completely inconsistent with our own future-proof planning, with our Hamilton Metro Spatial Plan and any other growth planning that we've got in place, which, incidentally, whenever we have had conversations with government, and they have been on future-proof, they have said that Hamilton's planning, future strategic growth planning, is some of the best in the country. They say that. They have said that. They like the work that we have been doing to grow our city going forward. However, this still came out, and Angela's absolutely huge, is correct. We can't go to government and have a meaningful ongoing conversation if the only answer we say is just no. We've actually got to fight for what's right for our city here. This puts a huge burden on infrastructure burden on us. It redirects where infrastructure would have gone over the next 10, 30 years. My question, and government has been consistent, where is the money to deliver this infrastructure faster than we were able to? Where's the money? And I'll continue to go to Wellington and I'll continue to ask for support from government for housing funding and for infrastructure, because that's the only way we make progress. We know we need houses. We do. I absolutely agree with Sarah. We need more homes. We need more affordable homes, and we need them fast. But this severely hamstrung our possibilities about how we might achieve that. It basically came over the top and said, this is the way we'd like you to consider it. And our choices were very limited all of a sudden. My message to the community on the back of this conversation that we've had today, and that's why I asked so many questions about the consultation and the process is have your say. And that could be very telling when the community start to tell us exactly the impact this has on them. Includes the development community and the residential community, the citizens. So I look forward to what comes out of the next part of the process. We'll continue the conversations with the government, you can believe that. Thank you. Councillor Naidu-Roth.
Thank you. Like most people, I just want to acknowledge staff and especially Councillor Ryan on the work that's already been done. I echo what many people feel in this chamber. It's not, when I look at the areas that we're looking at, introducing high density, whether it be Chartwell, Peach Grove, Hukanui, Thomas Road, it's just, I can't see it working practically because I don't think we have the bones to deal with that sort of density. But on the other hand, you've got government saying, you don't have a choice and it's either you're going to do it or we'll do it for you. So I completely support where Deputy Mayor and even Mark coming from. And on the other hand, I know the intent of what we're trying to do. So it is a very difficult situation to be in. For today, I'm going to support this, not because I support the idea of it, but because I support it being publicly notified. Like Mayor Paula just said, I think the more people we inform about this, the more people who have a say, the louder our noise can be, then maybe Wellington will hear how upset residents are. So I will support this today.
Thank you. And right of reply, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Look, just a few points to wrap up. Firstly, as some have already said, thanks to my colleagues in the committee. We sort of came on stream with some work to do and had to pivot with the MDRS thrown in the midst, and we've kind of gone full circle. But yeah, my thanks to all staff and everyone involved. One of the interesting things with the submissions too is this third party that's going to support lay people to engage and to do a submission. I think I haven't seen that before, and that's quite exciting. I don't know if this third party knows quite what they've signed up for, but I think that's a really positive thing. Just another point on financial contributions. I touched on a few of the benefits before, but Councillor Mark talked about Rutherford Street as an example. What we haven't been able to do in the past is capture sunk costs. So we haven't been able to get funding to improve the amenity or the streetscapes in those areas. But with this financial contribution, we're now attributing that, which we've never done in the past. So I think that's another really positive thing. In terms of urban design, we've got some quite strict urban design assessment requirements on 4 units or above, which was one of the grey areas we could apply in. So we've leaned in on that, which is going to be really significant. So that's really positive. And I guess the other hesitation with Deputy Mayor around the suburban development, plan enabled doesn't mean it's going to be built automatically. We've had very liberal no height restrictions in CBD for a long time, but we haven't had anything like the tower block in 30 or 40 years. So it's still got to be market led. So I think there's a lot of mitigations that will happen naturally. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go to the vote on the board. Woo. Please cast your vote.
I've done that for a few
I know.
months.
Forgotten how it goes. Excuse me.
The motion is carried. 10 for, 3 against.
Excellent. Thank you. Lunch is now till 1:30. Thank you.
Is it get your own? Thank you. Thank you. Oh, is it? Seen the lights.
You guys going for lunch or what are you doing? Yeah. Over to the food court. Lunch? Yeah. Yep. Oh, hey, mate. Hey, that's good. Hey, look, just finished early, but I was just talking about this. He lives just around the corner from
Carried unanimously.
Of August. Councillor's not sure, is there any need to talk to this? It's from your committee, Councillor O'Leary.
I have lots to say, no I don't, thank you.
Okay, so would you like to move it?
I would, thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Van Oosten. Any questions, concerns relating to that recommendation? 2 parts, city parking policy, speed management plan review. I'm surprised you're not speaking on parking. Okay, being no questions, we'll go into the debate, please. Councillor O'Leary.
Said it all last week, whenever, didn't I? Yeah, I don't need to say it again. Just hope everybody supports the accepting the recommendation.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to debate this in any? Councillor Bunting.
I said my bit then too.
You what?
Following the lead.
Okay. All right. And in terms of my debate, ditto. Shorter still. All right, let's go to the vote. Yeah, we were going on the board, were we? No, it's not coming up, Amy. It's up now on the board. Not always, but yeah, on the board. It's easier on Star.
The motion is carried unanimously.
So have I done them all now? Okay, so now we're going back to item 10, which is the Reform Response Programme update. Now, we did have a fairly full workshop discussion, etc., on this. So happy, of course, to take views and debate. But if there's only questions, if you've really got unanswered questions or concerns, any questions?
This on the whole report.
Yeah, it's on the whole report.
Yeah, I've got a question on the future of local government.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, why are we not joining up with the other local councils other than those ones that are named in the report, and doing that through CoLab to present a united front on what we think might be good for the future of local government, given that I suspect the outcome is likely to be some form of I wasn't going to use that word, Dave. I was trying to find another word.
Shared service.
Some way of more formalised shared services.
Thank you, Councillor Pascoe, through the Mayor. The initial conversation was with those councils who are closest to us, because we think we have the most aligned conversations, but that doesn't stop us having a wider conversation with all of the CoLab partners, and I can take that and ask Calvin if you'd like to.
Yeah, could you? Because I mean, there's Matamata Piakau, which is also on our border, so to speak, and it would make sense, given that CoLab are in there, that they would be the enabler, if you like, to bring those other councils who might have a similar view to us on board.
Yes, we can do.
Because I'm sure that we'll get a better outcome.
So that is happening, Councillor Rob.
Yep.
So there's been initial discussions at the CoLab board, and Kelvin's actually facilitating that through the CE's forum as well.
So that's beyond the group that are mentioned in the report.
Yeah, so it goes, and I think it mentions it in there, that there's the future-proof councils, and then there's also the wider, remembering that not all councils are part of CoLab. I think there's 11 of the 13.
Yeah.
There's also Rotorua District and Western Bay are joining CoLab in a sort of an associate sort of membership status.
Okay. Good, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, any further questions? No, there aren't. It's been moved and it's been seconded. We will go to the debate. Huh? No, have I not? Oh, it hasn't been moved and seconded.
Sorry. Thank you for the heads up. I sent through just a small addition to in the red there. Yeah. So just if I explain that.
Sorry. I don't know. I thought this was down.
It's on mute. The red addition would just request staff to update us on whether we're successful or not, basically, by that point on requesting an extension. And then we, have one last chance to decide what to do around the funding agreement at that point.
I think that reflects some of the narrative in the report.
Yeah.
That was the intention, but that sort of makes it a bit more concrete.
So you're going to move that?
Yeah, I'm happy to move it.
Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Taylor? All right, excellent. Any debate? Sarah, you're the mover now, so. Yes.
I think that we just need to be prudent around this because my understanding from staff is that the funding agreement, while we don't have to put any projects forward at the moment, it does at least lock in an obligation from government and through the DIA to provide the funding to us. And so there is a risk that if we don't meet the 30 September deadline and we don't get an extension, then we are kind of leaving things to fate a bit in terms of the better off funding if there are a change in circumstances. So I think when this update comes back, just some more clarification around the legal advice would be helpful in terms of how well that funding agreement does lock us in, but in terms of having an absolute watertight commitment around that funding. But it would be doing our community a disservice if ultimately, we lost out on $58 million and everything went ahead. And yeah, so it's just not a risk that I think we want to take lightly. So that's our opportunity to consider things one more time if the extension's not granted.
Thank you. Good points. Anybody else in debate? No. All in favour? Go to the board. We're voting. We are, aren't we? Voting on the board. There you go. Please vote now.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Excellent. Okay, so now we're going on to item 11, which is an update on the building program and policy. Hello, welcome. Yeah.
No, I'm not. No.
Paul, are you going to say anything, or are you just taking it as read, or you're going to highlight some things?
I'll just highlight a couple of things, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Council. The purpose of this report is to really review the ongoing need for Council's policy that we have on seismic performance. So Council's policy was developed in 2017 to guide the assessment, the ongoing use, and how we strengthen our own building portfolio. So since that time, there's been a maturing, I suppose, of the national policy framework in this space. There's been new assessment guidelines for how to do seismic assessments following learnings from Kaikoura. There's methodology for identification of earthquake-prone buildings has been applied. There's been new guidelines from MB on how to make decisions around the ongoing use of buildings that might be identified as earthquake-prone. And the legislative timetable has really just moved along, and our policy is kind of sitting in this space that it's aged and dated. So paragraph 34 of the report outlines how the various parts of Council's existing policy are now being dealt with under the various parts of the national framework. So staff have had a look at it as part of a ongoing policy review program, and we're of the view that the matters in the policy that the policy sought to control are now being adequately dealt with in the national framework. To retain a council policy in the space probably just creates risk of confusion. So over the life of the policy, it's been effective. We've had good understanding. We've developed good understanding of our building portfolio. A number of the larger and critical facilities have been upgraded. We note those in the policy. And we're now really moving into that space where those buildings in our portfolio that are still left or been identified as earthquake prone, we are managing them progressively, mostly when we're doing renewals or upgrades as part of those facilities, but dealing with things that way. We also take the opportunity of this, when this report's coming up to you, just give you a bit of an update of exactly where we're at, what buildings we're still talking about. We've got 13 of them that are council related. At the most fundamental level, the requirement for us is to demolish or strengthen these buildings up to a minimum of 34% on a priority basis of either 12 and a half or 25 years from now. So as part of the next long-term plan, those buildings that are still on the list, we'll be updating those, any costs or estimates that are associated with those buildings and be building those into kind of renewals and upgrade programs. Any questions?
All right, Councillor Thompson.
I just had one question around this, and it was around the timing of some of the buildings where there's particularly public access. Are there any that staff see as being particularly posing a risk that we should be mitigating earlier than later in terms of public health and safety, or are you comfortable with the current timeframes for remediating them?
It's likely that we will be strengthening buildings ahead of those legislative, those timeframes. So it's a mixture of things that we do there. I suppose we do look at the nature of the buildings, how they're being used, by how many people, on what frequency, and then also looking at what other work we're doing at the building on those buildings at the same time. And that kind of helps us with the prioritisation around that. We can't do everything all at once. And over the last 5 years, we've been working through those on a priority basis as well. You can kind of see we've picked off those big ones. And
because some of them have funding in like 2028, 29. And I guess it was just a question of, are there any that still remain a particular concern, or because clearly I can see you've picked off ones where, like in Waterworld, it was first the part inside rather than like the storage shed or whatever it is. So I'd just be keen to know if there were any areas where you would say actually were uncomfortable with still waiting till 28, 29 to remediate these, or if the risk is kind of low enough that it's appropriate.
We're comfortable with the program that we've got at the moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Pascoe.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Paul, for your report. Just a couple of questions. I'm focusing on paragraph 27, where you've got that table there with the NBS percentages. Is there any legal risk for council, whether as the operator or as the landlord, should there be an event? And I think 260 Victoria Street is a restaurant, I think, and there is St Peter's Hall, which is a property that we lease out to under a community lease arrangement. Is there a legal risk for council if there was to be an event there, that we could be in the firing line to be sued for having a building available to the public, that didn't meet that NBS requirement of 34%?
Yeah, so, and that's part of the work that MB have just released in the last couple of months. They've clarified with some guidance that because of there have been a number of buildings across the country, high profile ones, and they've sought to clarify that there isn't a reason, a seismic assessment below 33% isn't a reason to close a building. And so they've clarified that even from a health and safety point of view, that the WorkSafe would not be
Would not be
prosecuting
one. Okay.
if there was to be an event. And yep.
Okay.
And it
Okay.
was,
So just a
legislative time.
follow-on question to that: do we encounter increased insurance premiums on buildings that don't meet the 34% seismic? You know, so do these buildings come with a loading on the insurance premium because of the?
Yeah, to be honest, I can't speak to that. I know we do provide the information around it, so I assume yes.
Yeah. But it's not shown as a separate loading cost.
It's not huge, but Aon are made aware of it, and then that's in their overall insurance premium. So that Matthew and his team go through from Aon.
So they're not telling us it would have been $300, but because it's 20%, we're charging $500. That we don't get that sort of detail in the premium.
We'd have to check on that, Councillor Rob, and let you know. But like we have a pretty good relationship with.
Yeah, but that might be a precursor to how you prioritise the buildings that need that need to be strengthened earlier than later.
It wouldn't be a massive amount of extra money in the premium, from my understanding.
Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Bunting.
So let me just get this right. So essentially, we're saying we've had a pretty robust and good policy, but now the earthquake-prone building system from MB covers it, so we don't need one anymore.
Correct.
And this is what councils up and down the country are doing at the same time? Or?
Many councils didn't have a policy like what we did.
Righto.
So there wasn't policies like ours weren't common within the public sector. We were kind of at the forefront there.
Right.
And the legislative frameworks kind of caught up, and it kind of left our policy. And
yeah, and are you still comfortable that should, standards and percentages go up and down, we'd have enough option to have some say or have some guidance in there?
Yep.
Without a policy?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's cool. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Councillor Naidu-Rowe.
So when it's assessed, and then the notes say that you'd have to remedy within 12.5 to 25 years. So the list that we have, when did the time start? Are any of them getting up to that 12.5 years?
no, so the time actually hasn't started yet. The time starts once an earthquake-prone notice goes onto the building, which will be issued within the next couple of months.
So so then if we've known that it's been below whatever percentage for X number of years, does that take it into account?
No, the time starts from when so the framework's been developed in order not to penalise responsible building owners who have gone out and done assessments early to understand their portfolio.
Yeah.
So they've said the time would start from when the earthquake-prone notice is
okay. All right. And then
issued.
So for example, if we, like, for example, the building Victoria Street, 14%. So for argument's sake, if there was an earthquake tomorrow and something happened to that building, I mean, it looks like it's quite vulnerable. Where does liability lie, or are we, how does council fit into that, knowing that we have a 14% rating on it?
Yep. So there's nothing in legislation that requires us to stop using a building because of its earthquake rating.
We've just got to make sure that the tenants know that.
Okay.
So it's, and that's our property team just making sure that they have those conversations. And my understanding is that all our tenants know all this. There should be no surprises for them. That's the key thing, because you don't want it to be a surprise to them 2 years later that they've had people in a building that's 14% and they didn't know about it.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned next LTP that the costs would be updated. So that would, I'm just trying to factor in the cost escalation with those figures. So does it mean because some of them, like Sarah said, are quite far into the future. Does that mean every LTP it would just get updated to higher costs? And
Yeah, unless that we found a way to do that work as part of another ongoing renewals or maintenance as part of it. So, yep, the longer we delay, probably these costs would increase. So, we keep an active eye on those opportunities to do that.
And last question, from my understanding, please. So when a building's assessed and then the comments say that, you know, it's either going to be strengthened or some may be demolished or whatever, how is that decided? For example, the Enderley Park one says there's provision in 23-24, but we don't yet know what the future of that building is.
Correct.
So at which point do you make that decision?
So we would be holding off doing any work until we get that clarity around the long-term decisions around particular facilities. So you'll see there's a number in there that we're still kind of working out what that long-term future is. So
okay. And in the meantime, we're not obligated to close the building.
No.
But we have to let the tenants know.
Correct.
And hope that everything's okay. Thank you.
But just remembering these standards, there's components to buildings. So if building's got 14 components, one of the components could be 14%, all the other components could be 89%, but then it brings the overall standard of the building with that one component to the lowest percentage. So there's a lot of contextual information that our team sort of take into account.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Van Easton.
Thank you. Just on that last point, my assumption would be that that information is made available to our insurer so that they won't necessarily make the harshest judgment against us, but could use, a range to identify what our...
Correct, especially if we've done a detailed seismic assessment versus an initial seismic assessment, which is a more high level assessment. But we've had a whole program on that and done a lot of work around that. So our insurance brokers would have very good information on that.
Thank you, Lance. And my other question relating to the points that Councillor Naidu-Rolfe was raising regarding not just tenants, but people visiting buildings, etc. Are we developing any kind of a resource that helps to demystify, some of the questions that people would answer, overcoming any of the potential fears or concerns that they may have in entering or working in and or around a building?
We're not developing a resource per se. However, throughout the country at the moment, every local authority will be going through the issuing of these earthquake-prone notices. So there will be broader public awareness of what they mean. We have advised our staff, and those same messages can be made available for users of our facilities as well.
So if you've got, say, for example, a person in the library might see we haven't got any libraries, but a sticker, and then they want some more information, then there will be a staff member who has more information or can actually steer that person to the right person within council, which is probably Corey, who's sitting down the back, who's a guru on this.
Yeah.
So there will be a mechanism for people to find out more information that way.
Right. Just a one pager is kind of a useful way for people to be able to get information and, just hand it on to others who might be interested or concerned.
Yeah, I think MB are doing a FAQ or something I heard in the media. So
great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question for me, Waterworld. I see that, the remaining earthquake-prone elements are now plant and machinery. Does that mean that the changing room elements that were done?
Correct. When we did upgrade, we dealt with a number of the weaknesses that had been identified in the seismic assessment. There was one part that was just over a plant and machinery area.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
But yeah, as Lance says, that brings the whole building down to that 30%. So the context is really important to understand.
So this is around the communication that so what is the communication plan to the general public so that they all of a sudden become anxious or alarmed in certain spaces? There's such ominous silence at that question.
Well, no, I think it's just what I said to Councillor Maxine, that really we'd get people to talk to, like at Waterworld, to talk to Liz or one of the senior duty managers about that. They'll have the right information to give those people. To be honest, we could actually create ourselves, a whole lot of angst from people because it is a complex subject, and then to have a whole communications plan around it, and then we don't want to spook everyone, but we just want to make sure that the information's there. So, and have the right people who communicate that. My view is doing that in a personal way is probably best, but also using some of the information we get from MB. Look, there has been publicity around this over the last couple of months with some public buildings in Wellington, etc. That's why the government's moved to have a more consistent approach nationally. But with the stickering going on, and there's mention of the numbers in the report around New Zealand over the next wee while, I suspect there will be more interest in it, and we'll be prepared with messaging around that for the Hamilton situation.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll see.
Talk to you offline.
Yeah, no, we'll see, because I think at this time, uncertainty is the big lever for public.
Yeah.
When they see things they haven't known about. I'm not saying you should necessarily sledgehammer it, but I'm thinking there should be a portal which is easily identified for people to go and get information, background information.
Yeah, maybe we can put something on our website so you guys know the functionality of the website now, so it's not that difficult to put something up that's appropriate.
Understanding is pretty critical to people's comfort level in most things, all things. Right, thank you. All right, so has it been moved and seconded? I can move it if you like. Seconded, Councillor Van Oosten. I'm not going to debate. Okay. I probably just say a few things. As I say, any change at the moment is unsettling, especially in public buildings and spaces. So there will be people who get taken by surprise by this. Human beings are quite resilient. So we've moved on up here. We've moved on from the impacts of Christchurch. And, not necessarily forgotten about them, but don't hold them front of mind everywhere we go and all we do. But I do just want to make the note that when we invited the chair of Infrastructure Commission, Ross Copland, to the seminar with the Chamber of Commerce, one of the points he made was around the extreme infrastructure burden cost of earthquake. And what he did say, just out of interest, is I want to be careful because some of it was, private, but he indicated what we've heard in other places. So I think it's fair to share this, that it's not a matter of if places have a seismic event. It's about when they have a seismic event and how well prepared we are. Now, I understand that in terms of big metros, Hamilton's one of the safest cities, if not the safest city. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. Having said that, I was going to give having said that, we know we have some seismic activity. We've identified some minor fault lines and various things. The whole of New Zealand's a giant fault line, let's be real. So, we do need to take these things seriously in terms of the places where people are most at risk. So I look forward to seeing how people react. But I always believe you don't need to stir the fear, but you need to inform people. And I think that's pretty critical in my view. There you go. That was my debate. Councillor Bunting.
Look, I'll just be very, very brief and say, look, I remember when I first arrived on council, I think we had been here a matter of days, and one of our first induction meetings was Lance saying, sorry, we have to close the library because the whole line had moved with the Kaikoura earthquakes, and suddenly we became in that more vulnerable area. So I just want to congratulate staff and thank the team for the great way they've guided us through those renewals and building stuff to a point where we can now hand it over. Like Dr. Paul said earlier on, we didn't actually necessarily have or some councils didn't even have a policy. So the fact that we had a policy and we handled it pretty darn well. I just want to say thanks for your prudent work, Lance, and your team.
Yeah, no, thank you. And ditto, since I got a right reply. Oh, no, it's not my right reply yet, because Councillor Hamilton wants to say something.
Channeling Councillor Mark, I think this is a seismic shift in policy, and it puts us on a solid foundation. So happy to support.
I thought you were going to say something of volcanic proportions, but it was just a minor comment. Yeah, no, thank you to staff for all the work you do, and it's important that we do put public safety at the forefront of what we do. That was a bit lame, wasn't it? Yeah. No. All right. We'll go. That's better. That's better. That's why you do what you do, because you're good at it. Yeah. All right. We'll go to the vote on the board.
So the last time that I remember saying, like Tish says, if there was an earthquake, I said it here a couple of years ago, if there was an earthquake today and then went upstairs, remember, my floor started shaking and there was an earthquake. So people need to run, we're closest to it.
Oh no, Sarah. Angela could get some speed on. Sarah.
Councillor Thompson, could you please vote?
Sarah.
The motion is carried unanimously.
All right, I move that we move into public excluded, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. All in favour? Yes, carried. Yeah.